What do you get when you take an amazingly accomplished studio that made a Game of the Year winner back in 2014, and then you give them years and years and years to work on a game, 7 years since their last one, and you pour hundreds of millions of dollars into them? What do you get? Turns out you get shut down. Jason Schreier is breaking the news that Warner Brothers Games is shutting down Monolith Productions, Player First Games, and Warner Brothers San Diego. Sources tell Bloomberg News Warner Brothers is also canceling the Wonder Woman game. You know, I can't really say I'm surprised. In this video, I'm going to show you why I'm not surprised and why the cancellation of the Wonder Woman game may have actually just been putting something down that needed to be put down. So it may not be like as devastating a news story as you might expect, because it seems like Monolith was not the studio it was back in 2014 with Shadow of Mordor. And so we'll talk about it. But nonetheless, it's really remarkable that you can have a team like Monolith that makes one of the most innovative and crazy, clever and creative games in recent memory, back in like 2013-14 with Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. And then through mismanagement and greed, you can just slowly sap the talent away from the studio until it's just a husk that they crumple up and discard, which is basically what's happened with Monolith. A lot of the original devs have left to go do other stuff, and it's because the Wonder Woman game was caught in development hell for years and years and years, and what it ended up looking like, in my estimation, was probably not that great, which is why it was canceled and why Warner Brothers is just shutting it down and moving on. So in this video, I'm going to break it all down for you, going back to when this project was initially started all the way through just a few weeks ago, and then this news, because this is not as simple and clear cut as they shut down a really cool upcoming game. It's a little more complicated than that. And I'm going to tell you why. But first, of course, a thank you to our sponsor, F.E.A.R. F.E.A.R is the leading meal delivery service that provides fresh, never frozen meals right to your front door that are chef prepared and dietitian approved. If you hang out with me on stream, you know that I love F.E.A.R. I eat them all the time. It's actually become a bit of a meme that sometimes I'll start streams late because I'm eating a F.E.A.R before the stream starts. It's kind of a whole thing, and it's because I love them. They are, of course, delicious. They are dietitian approved, and you can actually select different meals that go specifically with whatever your diet is, whether you are trying to cut carbs or you just want something that's as tasty as possible. They have it all, and it gets delivered straight to your front door. My delivery actually is supposed to come here in the next 10 minutes, so I'm very excited. And I mean, I love it. F.E.A.R is a longtime partner of this channel, and it's for good reason, because they have a great product that I love and use every week. Me and my wife love them, so can't recommend them enough. Check them out. Links below in the description box, and make sure to use my link or scan the QR code on screen to save 50% off of your first box. So you can just try it, 50% on me. So Warner Brothers has posted this statement as clipped from American Truck Songs 9 on X, but basically in the statement, they confirm that they are canceling the Wonder Woman game. They're shutting down these studios, Monolith, Player First Games, and Warner Brothers San Diego. And this is a strategic change that's meant to reflect the direction, blah, 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 they're going in. Basically, they're just saying that they're going to double down on Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, DC, and Game of Thrones. That's what they're doing. So expect them to probably do more Batman stuff. They're definitely doing more Harry Potter stuff. They're going to have another Mortal Kombat, 15 DLC characters or whatever, and that's what they're doing. Nothing more complicated than that. They're just not trying to experiment too much with other stuff. When they've tried, they've gotten Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and I have reason to believe that the Wonder Woman game could have turned into something similar to Suicide Squad. Let me break it down for you. So we all know that Monolith created the amazing game Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, and then just a handful of years later, they put out Middle-earth Shadow of War. This game also featured the much beloved Nemesis System, one of the most groundbreaking and innovative gameplay mechanics introduced in the gaming industry probably in the last 20 years. However, the game was plagued with over-monetization at launch. People forget, but back in 2017, there were two big games that were the scandalous games of the year. Like, think of Suicide Squad and Concord for last year. It was in 2017, Battlefield 2 and Middle-earth Shadow of War. These games both featured loot box monetization in them that was so aggressive, it significantly harmed the player experience. In the case of Battlefront 2, it was so bad and so over monetized that Disney themselves even had to step in and tell EA to calm down with it, cutting out a lot of what they called star cards, which were basically player character altering cards and buffs and perks that you could either grind for or pay real money for. However, this just turned the entire game into a pay-to-win disaster, and because they wanted you to spend money on the star cards, they built the game in a way where you were not competitive unless you spent money, because they wanted to push you into spending money. And like I said, this got so bad that Disney had to step in because European regulators were stepping in, talking about potentially regulating the entire gaming industry as a result. Or in the case of Middle-earth Shadow of War, they locked the true ending of the game behind an endgame grind that basically required you to maintain different like fortresses you had taken over. But the only way you could do that is if you had high enough level orcs manning your castle and fortress, and you could either grind for those, leveling them up very slowly, or you could pay for these loot box things that would give you legendary orcs automatically. And people did the math on how long it would take you to just play through the game to reach that ending, and by some accounts it could take an extra 80 to 120 hours after the initial 35 to beat the campaign in order to see the true ending, just because it was so grindy unless you spent money. If you spent money, you could get through it pretty quickly in like 5 to 10 hours, but if you didn't spend money, you had to spend over 100 hours grinding it out just to get what somebody else who paid 50 bucks or 100 bucks or 500 bucks could get instantaneously. And again, because these games were built around pushing you into the monetization, everything was balanced around it. So the average player's experience was significantly lessened unless they were willing to spend money. This is part of the reason why nowadays when people are freaking out over like modern battle passes and stuff, I'm like, you know what? Let's just take a moment to appreciate we're not in 2017 again, because in 2017, it was commonplace for publishers to just put loot boxes and all sorts of nonsense in single player games and then make those games so tedious to play unless you spent money that it was like not even worth playing. A lot of people were like, I don't see the big deal about the loot boxes. If you don't like it, just watch the ending in a YouTube video. I'm like, bro, you're literally telling me unless you're spending money, don't bother playing the game. It's crazy. It's just unacceptable. But thankfully, gamers came together, raged about it. We all lost our minds, and then they kind of stopped. Eventually, they would strip out all of the loot boxes from Middle-earth Shadow of War, and they would go and strip out all the star card nonsense from Battlefield 2. A little bit too late in my opinion. The games still are kind of hollow because that core pillar of them was stripped out, but nonetheless, they eventually tried at least to right the wrong. However, this put Monolith in a really interesting spot because now they were coming off of a game which was moderately successful despite the controversy, but it was not anywhere near as successful as the original Shadow of Mordor game. And so they had to figure out what they were going to do next. According to reporting from Jason Schreier, Monolith Productions would then go on after releasing Middle-earth Shadow of War, and they would begin working on a brand new franchise that would experiment with procedural storytelling. This sounds kind of similar to what Ken Levine is doing with the game Judas, where he describes it as narrative Lego bricks, but basically they wanted to take the Nemesis system and then build out a narrative sort of version with it, where different characters within the story wouldn't necessarily die or like become your enemy or anything, but they would take the procedural stuff that they built for the Nemesis system and then they would tie that into the story more directly. Sounds kind of cool to me, honestly. But executives, shocker, at Warner Brothers weren't particularly interested in creating new characters and universes from scratch, according to people familiar with the discussions. They suggested to Monolith's crew that they should attach the project to one of the company's many established franchises, such as Game of Thrones or something in the DC Comics portfolio. So the developers, who had won critical acclaim with Shadow of Mordor's unique Nemesis narrative system, in which fallen enemies could come back to life with memory of the protagonist's actions, struggled to graft another existing franchise onto their nascent ideas. And this is kind of the tale of the tape with a lot of Warner Brothers stuff, is that it's heavily mismanaged and in some cases micromanaged from the top down. Instead of letting the devs do what they think is best for the ideas that they have, they just want them to use big IP because executives think that use big IP, make big dollar. Everybody knows Wonder Woman. Put Wonder Woman in the game, you'll make lots of money. Everybody knows Suicide Squad. Maybe we just make a Suicide Squad game and that will therefore make lots of money. And it's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, if you ask me. But nonetheless, they forced them to go go and try to find a way to take their ideas and graft them onto an established IP within their portfolio. And as you can see, the game plodded along for more than 3 years in something of a standoff where executives at Warner Brothers appeared to know it wasn't going to happen, but did not take decisive action. In 2021, Warner Brothers finally canceled it. The head of Monolith, Kevin Stevens, no relation to yours truly, and most of his directors quit and started a new studio with rival EA. And if you don't know what this game is, we actually just talked about it on my live stream, Luke Stevens live channel. This is the team that's making the Black Panther game that EA has not really like fully revealed yet or anything. And so they lost some of the key talent that made Monolith. And so what was left behind is a group of developers who I'm sure are very talented in their own right, but the OGs that really made Monolith what it was were gone after this point in 2021. And what game does this remind you of? Perhaps Suicide Squad, where a lot of the core developers that worked on Batman Arkham City, Batman Arkham Knight, those people left the studio prior to the game's launch, probably because they knew the ship was sinking and they just wanted to get out and do their own thing. And in this case, it seems like a very similar story, unfortunately. As you can see, the remaining staff soon pivoted to a game based on the Wonder Woman comic books, and it's now been more than 7 years. This article was written just a few weeks ago. It says it's now been more than 7 years since the studio's last game. The initial version of Wonder Woman tried reimagining the Nemesis system with the game's namesake heroine befriending enemies. But that idea has since been tossed out in favor of a more traditional action-adventure game. And this is something I can actually speak to. I've spoken to a handful of people who have worked on the Wonder Woman game in various capacities over the last handful of years, some of them through more contracted positions and others that were just directly involved in the game's development within the studio. And those people have told me that this attempted reinvention of the Nemesis system wasn't as terrible as it sounds. It sounds awful, like, to be very, very clear. Oh, the Nemesis system, where you have enemies that die and then come back and remember the actions you took against them and can learn and grow, and they're just trying to kill you as a result. And then you take that, which everybody loves, and you reinvent it into friendship, where everybody comes together and an enemy becomes a friend, and you come together and you work together to fight enemies, and it's all about, you know, making a rainbow. And it sounds awful, I grant you, but what this would have looked like in the game is something a little bit more dynamic. The goal, the initial pitch, as I understand it from these people I've spoken to, was that they wanted these NPCs that help you in combat to learn from you and to adjust to you. So, for example, if you are somebody that really loves getting right up in an enemy's face and engaging in melee, your companions, or in this case, it's not nemesis or friends, whatever they would have called them, they would then see how you play and learn from that. So maybe they would then gain abilities that could buff you when you go in and fight melee, or maybe they can hold enemies and then you beat them up from there. They wanted to create this sort of dynamic thing where your companions, for lack of a better term, could work better with you and still learn and grow and develop and evolve throughout the course of the game, but they just wanted to like flip it on its head. The Nemesis system is about enemies, and then this one would be about friends. Not what I would have done, but again, not like the worst idea when you actually hear it described a little bit more. But still, I don't think it really makes sense, and I don't think it would be anywhere near as engaging as the actual Nemesis system, but that's just me. But even in this Bloomberg article from just a handful of weeks ago, you can see that they say now Wonder Woman's fate remains in question, according to people familiar with the business, because of challenges following the changes in Monolith's leadership and issues surrounding the game's technology. And this is something that I can also speak to, because the people that I've talked to and had conversations with who have worked on this said that rebuilding the Nemesis system for the new tool set that they were using was an ever-loving nightmare. It was just a disaster. And part of it was because they tried to rebuild it in this friendship-oriented way. And so then when the pivot was made to go back to a more traditional, like, action-adventure enemy-based system, it just didn't work. And so then there was talks of stripping out the Nemesis system from the new version of the Wonder Woman game, and it was just a train wreck. And all of this is while leaders are leaving the studio, and the people that you were looking to for guidance, they're all headed out the door, and that creates a lot of instability. I mean, if you're trying to do this very ambitious, crazy thing that takes years and years of work, and then the people you've been looking up to, the people you've been looking to lead you for years, head out the door, signaling pretty clearly they don't believe in the direction this is going. They don't believe in the project. They don't like it. How are you supposed to do your best work? I mean, of course the game is going to fall apart at that point, and that's certainly what seems to have happened. But one of the saving graces for this Wonder Woman game was that people kept pointing to how it was allegedly going to be pro-consumer, how it probably was not going to be a live service disaster or anything, but that was based on an interview and sort of press statement that went out. Basically, back in November of 2023, there was an article posted by IGN and some other people from WCCF Tech, where they reported that there was a job posting looking for a candidate with experience helping maintain a live service or a live software product or game. And a lot of gamers looked at that and said, uh-oh, they're gonna make the new Wonder Woman game a live service game. That sounds like ass. Let's not do that. But Warner Brothers actually came out and offered a statement. What they said was, quote, Wonder Woman is a single-player action-adventure game set in a dynamic open world. This third-person experience will allow players to become Diana of Themyscira. I don't watch Wonder Woman stuff, I have no idea. And introduce an original story set in the DC universe while also featuring the Nemesis System. Wonder Woman is not being designed as a live service, a Warner Brothers spokesperson said. They actually came out, shut this down, said, nope, that's not what we're doing, which is cool. But again, I want you to look at something kind of important. Look at this date. It was originally posted November 17th, and then it was updated November 17th later that same day, just 46 minutes later. But November of 2023, bear that in mind, because what happened just a couple of months later? Well, there were multiple investor calls where executives within Warner Brothers Discovery kept saying that they wanted to refocus their gaming efforts and double down on live service. They thought, despite the success of Hogwarts Legacy, that the future was in live service. The future was in online games, multiplayer games, games with monetization that keeps players coming back, blah, blah, blah. And that was always weird because they were saying that while they had Hogwarts Legacy and this Wonder Woman game they were saying was single player and all of that. But what's really interesting about this is if we look at that article from just a few weeks ago about this Wonder Woman game and other Warner Brothers projects, look at this. One of the biggest bets in development, a video game based on Wonder Woman, has struggled to coalesce, according to people familiar with the project. Early last year, this article was a few weeks ago from today, meaning early in 2024, the Wonder Woman game was rebooted and switched directors. The game has already cost more than $100 million, said people who asked not to be identified, discussing non-public information, and it is still years away from release if it ever makes it to market. Even a few weeks ago, people speaking to Jason Schreier were saying, I'm not so sure we're ever going to see the light of day, and they ended up being right. But why is this important? The fact that it was rebooted early last year and switched directors? This is pure speculation. I have not spoken to anybody that worked on the project in the last year specifically, but it would not surprise me if they rebooted it into a more live service oriented game. If they rebooted it in like right before Suicide Squad launched in like January of 2024, and then they just realized this is not going to work. And then they spent a year working on a live service version and it was a total disaster, and they decided to just walk away before wasting another $200 million. They said, let's just leave it at $100 million and move on. Nowadays, after another year of development, it's probably closer to like $150 million, but who knows? Who knows? The point is, anybody who's like really, really sad about this cancellation, I would just remind you that it's pretty rare for good games to get canceled. It just is. Typically, games get canceled because they're not coming together. Something's not right. And sometimes they waste a ton of potential and they waste a game that otherwise could have been good, and they cancel it for some stupid reason. But a lot of the time it's simply because the non-public information is revealing that the game is just not going to work. It's just not going to work. So they kind of cut their losses, just accept that it's a wash, and they move on. And I have a feeling the Wonder Woman game was probably one such project, that this game had been troubled for years and years and years, rebooted, switched directors. They tried to make a Nemesis system that was actually a friend system. They tried to do all this other nonsense, and it just wasn't coalescing. It wasn't working out. And so finally they just decided, let's just shut it down. But even if the game wasn't going to be great, and this just, saved them another massive flop, it still is an example of horrifying mismanagement on the corporate level. This was one of the most prolific and well accomplished and awarded studios in the early to mid 2010s. And the idea that they would go on to patent the Nemesis system, a patent that holds, I believe, through 2036. We looked at it on stream a handful of months ago, but I believe it's like 2034 or 2036 that they have a patent on the Nemesis system. Nobody else can make a Nemesis system game until then. And they have proceeded to do absolutely nothing with it. They have done nothing with it. They made Shadow of War, which was a disaster in many ways. And then they've done nothing with the Nemesis system at all. They've just sat on it. And people are like, oh, now that they're shutting down Monolith, maybe now we see it. No, that's not how it works. Warner Brothers patented the Nemesis system. They still hold the patent. Warner Brothers isn't shutting down. Monolith is. But Daddy, who owns the patent, he's still out there and he's still going to lock it down and enforce it. But it's just a colossal waste of talent and resources. And it really is remarkable and amazing. It really is shocking. But, you know, I think with a lot of these things, it's just important to remember that the studio we remember from 2014, it's not there anymore. Even some of these big head honchos like Mr. Stevens, he's left. He's been at EA for years now and is working on other stuff. A lot of his directors and the people that made Monolith what it was, they've all gone and they're doing other things. So the Monolith we knew and loved wasn't there anymore. And it's still tragic to see so many people losing their jobs simply because of mismanagement on the executive level. But you know, this is the industry. It's just executives doing stupid stuff and then punishing the underlings for their mistakes. Meanwhile, they're cashing, you know, massive paydays and flying around on private jets, writing it off as a business expense. And this is just how it is, unfortunately. But you know, it's one of those stories I can't say I'm surprised to see, but it's still just really, really disappointing to see so much time and so much money and talent wasted for really no reason. I mean, what did they get out of it? Nothing. It's just a disaster. Just a disaster. And I'm sorry I don't have anything more to really say. Monolith was a studio that made one of my favorite games of my teens, like of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. It's a phenomenal game. It's still aged really, really well. It's still an awesome time. And the idea that they would do basically nothing of significance for over a decade and then get shut down is just tragic. But that's what happens when you have morons at the helm. You shouldn't be surprised when you run aground and proceed to sink dramatically and very slowly. So that's kind of all I have to say. But let me know what you think of all of this in the comment section below. It's insane. I am at a loss for words after all of this. So if there's any silver lining, maybe it's just that, you know, the game probably would have sucked anyways, even if it saw the light of day. So I guess there's that to make us feel better, but I don't think that that's much of a panacea to this whole situation. I think it's just cope. Is that the technical term? I don't know. It's just a colossal waste and it's tragic. And now we really probably won't see anything from the Nemesis system for another 10 years or so when it goes open source or whatever the term would be when it's released from the patent. And then we, at that point, probably will see a bunch of games using it and it'll be really cool. And we'll see how much stuff we've missed out on for absolutely no reason other than Warner Brothers mismanagement. So there you go. Real quick, if you're interested, subscribe to my newsletter. I'll have it linked in my link tree in the description box below. It's just a new thing me and my team are doing once a week. We send out a newsletter with news recaps of the industry, with a little bite-sized thoughts of mine that I write out and explain something in the industry that I found particularly interesting. And so if you're interested, it's free. You just put your email address in and then it goes to your inbox. It's pretty cool. So check that out at the link tree. It's super easy to sign up. Again, it's free. Why not? And if you don't open the email, whatever. Like, I'm just glad that you even considered putting your email address in. Okay. So do what you will, but I just wanted to let you know about that. But until next time, my friends, much love. I'll see you in the next video. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.